They say the desert doesn't lie, but that day it became the cruelest judge of all. Picture this. A young woman, 23 years old, stretched across burning sand like a sacrifice to some ancient god. Her wrists tied so tight to iron stakes that blood trickles down her fingers, her ankles bound until the rope cuts through skin. The sun above her, merciless. The ground beneath her, scorching, and all around her, silence. The kind of silence that comes when good people choose to look away. Her crime? She was accused. Her trial. 3 days under the desert sun. Her jury. A village too afraid to speak the truth. This is the story of Abigail Dawson. And this is the story of the man who dared to break the chains of tradition when everyone else turned their backs. Stay with me, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. The heat that morning was different. It wasn't just hot. It was angry, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and the earth crack open like a wound that won't heal. Abigail Dawson lay spread-eagled in the center of that wasteland, her body forming a cross against the dust, each limb pulled taut by rope, each rope anchored to stakes driven so deep into the ground that no amount of struggling would ever set her free. Her dress, once white, now stained with dirt and sweat and blood. Her hair matted against her forehead, her lips cracked and peeling, moving in silent prayer that no one would hear. Every breath she took felt like swallowing broken glass. Around her, the villagers stood in a half circle. 50 people, maybe more. Men with their arms crossed, women clutching their children close, old folks leaning on canes, their faces carved from stone. Not one of them moved to help her. At the front of the crowd stood Silas Boone, tall, angular, with eyes like chips of flint and a mouth that knew only one expression: authority. His hand rested on the coiled whip at his belt, though he didn't need it. The sun was doing his work for him. His voice cut through the morning air like a blade. This is the old law. The law of our fathers and their fathers before them. If she survives 3 days beneath heaven's gaze, she walks free, her innocence proven. If she perishes, then her guilt is confirmed by God himself. This is our way. This is our justice, the crowd murmured. Some nodded. Others whispered prayers or spat into the dirt as if sealing a pact with the devil. Abigail's voice, barely more than a rasp, broke through. Please. I beg you, I didn't do it. I swear on everything holy, I didn't steal anything. But her words were carried away by the wind, lost in the vastness of the desert. Boone turned to face her, his expression cold. Gold disappeared from our stores. Someone took it, and the signs all point to you, girl. You lived near the storage house. You had access. You had need. I had nothing. Abigail's voice cracked, desperate. I would never. Enough. Boone's hand went up. The sun will decide. Not you, not me. The sun doesn't lie. One by one, the villagers turned their backs. Mothers pulled their children away. Old men shook their heads. Young men who might have once smiled at Abigail in the street now wouldn't meet her eyes. They walked away. All of them, leaving her alone in that burning expanse of sand and rock. And as they disappeared over the ridge, Abigail screamed. She screamed until her voice broke, until her throat was raw, until the only sound left was the wind and the buzzing of flies circling overhead. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The heat became unbearable. Her skin blistered. Her lips bled. Her vision blurred. In her delirium, she thought of her mother, of the farm they once had before the drought took it, of the smell of bread baking in the morning, of laughter that now seemed like it belonged to someone else's life. She didn't want to die like this, not unseen, not unheard, not condemned by a law that cared nothing for the truth. But who would come? Who would dare stand against Silas Boone and the weight of generations? The answer was riding toward her at that very moment. Elias Carter was a man who preferred silence. At 56 years old, he'd seen enough of the world to know that most words were just noise. He worked his ranch alone, ate alone, slept alone, and he liked it that way. The war had taken things from him, a brother, a wife, a future he'd once believed in. When he came back, he brought only scars and a belief that the safest way to live was to stay invisible. But that afternoon, as he rode across the desert on his way to trade goods in the next town, he heard something that stopped him cold. A sound. faint, almost swallowed by the wind. A voice. He pulled the reins and turned his horse toward the sound, and that's when he saw her. A young woman, staked to the ground like an animal left for predators, her body limp, her face turned toward the sky. Elias's jaw tightened. He'd seen cruelty before. He'd seen men do terrible things in the name of orders, in the name of survival, in the name of God. But this was different. This was calculated. This was tradition turned into torture. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the cracked earth. As his shadow fell across her, Abigail's eyes fluttered open. "Please," she whispered. The word barely made it past her lips. "Please, untie me." Elias knelt beside her. His weathered face showed nothing, but his hands moved quickly, pulling a knife from his belt. "You guilty?" he asked, his voice rough as gravel. "No." The word came out like a sob. "I swear, I didn't do anything." He studied her for a moment. Then he cut the first rope. It snapped free with a sound like a whip crack. Her wrist fell limp, the skin beneath raw and bleeding. He cut the second rope, then the third, then the fourth. As the final rope fell away, Abigail tried to sit up but collapsed. Elias caught her, lifting her with surprising strength. She weighed almost nothing. The desert had already taken too much. He carried her to his horse and set her carefully in the saddle. She slumped forward, barely conscious, her hands gripping the saddle horn like it was the only real thing left in the world. "They'll kill you for this," she whispered. Elias climbed up behind her, taking the reins. "Let them try." He turned the horse and started riding, but he'd barely made it 50 yards when he heard the shout, "Stop right there, Carter." Elias pulled the reins. He didn't turn around immediately. He just sat there, feeling the weight of what was coming. Then he turned his head. Silas Boone stood on the ridge with 4 men behind him, all armed, all ready. Boone's voice carried across the distance, sharp and furious. "You think you can just ride off with her? You just spat on our law, on the law of our fathers." Elias spoke calmly, his voice low and steady. "That's not law, Boone. That's cruelty. And you know she's innocent. You just needed someone to blame." Boone's face darkened. "She's a thief. And you're a fool. Prove it." The words hung in the air. Boone's hand moved toward his revolver, but he didn't draw. Instead, he gestured to his men. "Take her back, and teach this old man what happens when you break our laws." The first man rushed forward, swinging a wooden club. Elias shifted his weight, letting the man's momentum carry him past, then drove an elbow into his spine. The man went down hard. The second came with a knife. Elias caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted it until the blade fell, then drove a knee into the man's ribs. He crumpled. The third raised a pistol. Elias kicked it from his hand before he could fire, then slammed him face first into the dirt. The fourth man froze, his eyes darting between Elias and Boone, waiting for orders. But Boone didn't move. His jaw worked, his hand still hovering near his gun. He'd seen men like Elias before, men who'd been forged in fire and couldn't be broken by threats. Finally, Boone spat into the dust. "This isn't finished, Carter. You and that girl will pay. Both of you." He turned sharply and motioned his men to follow. They limped away, bloodied and humiliated. Elias watched them go, his heart pounding but his face calm. Then he turned the horse and rode on, with Abigail barely conscious in front of him. Neither of them spoke, but they both knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The town of Red Bluff was quiet that evening when Elias rode in. He went straight to the sheriff's office, where Sheriff Thomas Hale stood waiting, arms crossed, watching the street. Hale was an old friend. They'd fought together in the war, saved each other's lives more than once. But they hadn't spoken in years. Men like them didn't do reunions. "Elias Carter," Hale said slowly, his eyes moving from Elias to the half-conscious girl in the saddle. "What the hell happened?" Elias dismounted and lifted Abigail down. "Silas Boone happened." Hale's expression hardened. He'd heard the stories. He knew what Boone was capable of, but knowing and proving were 2 different things. Inside the office, Elias laid Abigail on a cot. Hale knelt beside her, examining the rope burns, the blisters, the dehydration. He shook his head. "This is barbaric." "That's their law," Elias said bitterly. "Law?" Hale stood up, his fists clenched. This is murder dressed up as tradition, but believing her isn't enough. We need proof. We need evidence that Boone set her up. Then find it. Hale nodded. Give me time. I'll dig. I'll send men to question traders. I'll look into Boone's accounts, his storehouse, his deals. If he's dirty, we'll find it. Over the next several days, Abigail stayed in a small room near the sheriff's office. Elias visited her often. At first, she barely spoke. The trauma of those hours in the sun had left her hollow, but slowly, she began to open up. She told him about her parents, about the farm they'd lost, about how Boone's men had come in the night and accused her without proof, about how the village had turned on her because it was easier to believe a lie than to question their leader. Elias listened. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. He just listened. And in those quiet moments, something began to shift between them. One evening, as the sun set outside the window, Abigail looked at him, her eyes clear for the first time. You could have left me there. Why didn't you? Elias was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rough with old pain. Because no one should die like that, and because I've lost enough already. Abigail reached across the table. Her hand brushed his, and for the first time in years, Elias didn't pull away. But outside, danger was closing in. Sheriff Hale returned one night with a stack of documents. His face was grim. I found it, he said. Shipments of gold that never reached their destinations. Ledgers that don't add up. Traders who were too scared to talk, but talked anyway when I pressed them. Boone's been stealing from the village for years, and when the gold went missing this time, he needed someone to blame. Elias's jaw tightened. So she was innocent all along. Completely. Abigail looked between them, her voice trembling. Will they believe you? Hale set the documents on the table. They will. Because I'm not going to give them a choice. Sheriff Hale rode into Boone's village 3 days later with Elias and Abigail at his side. The entire town gathered in the square, their faces wary, uncertain. Hale stood before them and laid out the evidence. He read from the ledgers. He quoted the traders. He showed them the records of shipments that had disappeared under Boone's watch. At first, the villagers were silent. Then they began to murmur, then to shout. Boone tried to deny it. He cursed, he threatened. He called it lies and conspiracy, but the evidence was undeniable. One by one, the people who had once feared Boone turned on him. The same villagers who had left Abigail to die now demanded justice. They dragged Boone to the very place where Abigail had been bound. The 4 iron stakes still stood in the ground, waiting. If the sun is our judge, someone shouted, let it judge you, Boone. The crowd roared in agreement. Boone struggled, screaming threats and curses, but they tied him down, wrists, ankles, stretched out beneath the same merciless sky he'd condemned others to face. Abigail stood beside Elias, watching. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. It's cruel, she whispered. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. Yes, but sometimes a cruel law swallows the man who made it, and maybe that's justice enough. The crowd turned away, leaving Boone alone in the desert. His screams followed them, but no one looked back. As they rode out of the village, Sheriff Hale looked at Elias and Abigail. You're free now, both of you. But freedom in this land always comes with a price. Don't forget that. Elias nodded. He understood. They rode together toward the horizon where the sun was setting in shades of fire and gold. For the first time in years, Elias felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. Abigail glanced at him, her voice soft but steady. Thank you. You gave me back more than my life. You gave me hope. Elias allowed himself a small smile. Maybe you gave me something too. They rode on, side by side, into the desert that had once tried to kill them both. So what do we take from this story? Maybe that justice, though slow, will always find its way. Maybe that one person's courage can break chains that others are too afraid to touch. And maybe, just maybe, love can grow even in the harshest deserts. If this story moved you, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you can ride with me into the next Wild West tale. Now let me ask you this. If you had been there that day, would you have dared to cut those ropes? Would you have stood against the village and their law? And do you believe cruel traditions should ever decide who lives and who dies? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, partner, keep riding.